Hi, this is Denise Matthew, and welcome to another part of HT 101, How to Read Your Human Design Chart. I just wanted to let you know that if you wanted to slow down the speed of my voice, it's an easy thing to do. Just do it on the playback speed as I'm showing here, and it will be an experience tailor-made for you. This is the same body graph that I've used for example, just so that you know where things are in the chart. So we're going to go through the same body graph that I've had for the whole chart. This is the body graph of Yogananda, and he was an Indian guru who came to North America, and he sort of spread meditation and yoga throughout the North America. He was all about being mindful, and he was from India and had this calling to come to North America to spread the word. And he had a lot of mystical things happen to him. He could go into extremely deep trances. Many people have been influenced or inspired by his teachings, but also he had written one book called An Autobiography of a Yogi, and a lot of people, and I think Steve Jobs, for instance, was somebody who, when he passed, he had given the instructions that at his funeral he wanted everybody to have a copy of that particular book. So a lot of people, I think even the Beatles, had some interaction with his teachings, if not him in person. But he had a big presence when he lived, and I mean, he's been dead for quite a few years. He was born back in 1893 in India. So let's go through his chart and see if it lines up with the life he lived. So let's go through first his type, find out what his type is, what his strategy is, and we'll check out his profile and talk a little bit about that as well. If we look at his chart, we see that he's a manifestor type, and we know he's a manifestor type, first of all, because of course it's written, but the other way we know he's a manifestor type is that he has a motor to his throat. So if we look at, for him, it's not what you call a direct connection to the throat. So in other words, there's only one channel and it takes it right to the throat. His goes through, his will center is a motor, and it goes through his spleen, and then it goes up through the 48-16 channel and goes to his throat. So that's how we know he's a manifestor. The other requisite for being a manifestor is that he is an open sacral. So we know that he has an open sacral and he also has a motor to the throat. And that, in fact, will tell us that he's a manifestor. Now that we know he's a manifestor, we also know that the manifestor, their whole strategy is all about informing. Manifestors are here to manifest or to go out and initiate whatever they want to initiate. The only boss, or, and I say boss in quotations, would be something bigger than them, and that would be like the universe. Now, if he had an emotional wave, if he was emotionally defined, and I know I'm jumping ahead and talking about his authority, but he doesn't have emotional authority. That's the first thing that we'd also want to know, because that sort of will affect how he makes his decisions as a manifestor. That would mean he would need to go through his emotional wave before he made his decisions to initiate. But since he's open emotionally, we know for sure that he doesn't have an emotional wave, and so he can make his decisions in a different way. He's splenic authority. It's written on the chart as well. We'll talk about the splenic authority in just a minute, but let's talk about the fact that his strategy is to figure out what he wants to do in his life, what he wants to initiate, and once he decides where he wants to go, what he wants to initiate, it's all about informing the people that are important to him of his intention or what he wants to do. So, for instance, if he wanted to move to North America, and he had a guru that he used to work with, he would inform his guru, I'm going to move to North America. He's not asking the guru if he could move to North America. He's telling the guru, I am moving to North America, because the guru is someone who's important to him in his life, and he's part of his whole teaching. And then, he needs to be told. So then he would inform the guru. Yogananda was a profile 1-3. So we go back to the first line is all about data collection, and the third line is all about experimenting. We do know that this is a right angle profile because a 1-3 is a right angle profile. It's not a left angle profile. So we're talking about somebody who wasn't out giving karma to people. He was here on a personal journey to find his way and find how things worked with him. There is this investigation, a lot of investigation and investigating and then experimenting. So there's this whole concept of going to a different country, investigating that country, experimenting with his teachings, experimenting with what he had to bring to that particular country, what kind of teachings he had to bring, his yoga teachings to that particular country. Okay, now we're going to go into his open centers. But before we do, we're going to go into his splenic authority. Now, we know that the splenic authority is something that comes from the spleen, which means it's an intuitive energy or it's an awareness center. The energy of the spleen or the messages that the spleen give are the messages in the now. So it's a real, his intuition would have been, or his authority would have been a really quick kind of pulse that would say, okay, this is what you need to know. This is the answer you need to have. Also, because he has an open emotional center, we know that his authority is going to be something where if you feel good in that moment, if you get an internal hit that, yes, this is correct for you in the moment, then you act on that decision. So in other words, if he felt good on something he wanted to initiate in the moment, then that would be a green light for him to go ahead with it. So he would need to be in connection with his intuition. He has a lot of gates on his spleen, so he would have a lot of different ways of getting intuitive hits to help him, maneuver and manage his decisions in what he wanted to initiate. So that's something important to know. We will talk about the gates when we get into the gates part. But for now, we know that he's a splenic authority. He has a lot of intuition, but the splenic authority is all about a quick hit and moving on, and it doesn't come back again to give you another hit. It's in the moment, and again, the open emotion is all about an in the moment decision. If it feels good, you make the decision and you go ahead, and for him it would be to initiate. He also has an open heads, and we know that that's a pressure center. He also has an open root, which is another pressure center. So he has both pressure centers wide open. The open head is open to inspiration, but always being inspired. So he would have had potential for a lot of inspiration, to be inspired by a lot of different things. And based on his story, it seems like he was inspired a lot. And because of his profile, he would have wanted to find out the data on things, the information about things. And, after he did, he would go out and experiment. So he would be inspired potentially, go out and experiment with what he had discovered. So I would expect there would be a lot of experimentation, which he actually did. He had a lot of experimentation. He had a lot of people that he sort of met up with and would talk to and figure out what they had, what kind of information he could get from them, and then he would move on. And some people he would stick around with, and other people he would just move on. It was a lot of data collection, which would make a lot of sense because the open head is all about this inspiration, trying to figure out these inspirations, trying to move through these inspirations to understand what is what and what he could get or learn from it. He also has an open ajna, which would have meant that his beliefs were very fluid. Based on his story, he didn't come in with his whole concept of, I believe he was brought up as a Hindu, but he was very open to other faiths. In fact, he had pictures of Jesus and other spiritual leaders, or you would say divinities of different religions. So he was open to different religions, which is something that is very common with somebody with an open ajna. They're not fixed in their belief. There is a fluidity that they can move and understand different concepts. Yes, they will be imprinted basically with things that had been part of his life, but again, there would be this ability to look at other people's perceptions, look at other people's concepts, look at other people's ideations, and say, yes, I can actually see that point of view as well. So this is something that you don't oftentimes see in spiritual leaders, because they're from what I have seen and the research that I've done, a lot of people who are spiritual leaders come in with a fixed ajna because they have a firm belief and a fixed belief in the particular spiritualization that they're actually connected to. He also has an open identity. and he only has one gate on his open identity, which is quite unusual. So he had an extreme fluidity of his identity. What that means is that this whole concept of when he met somebody, he could connect with their souls. He could figure out who they were based on their souls. So it was like a real connection with the souls, and it was based on this one particular gate, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's only one gate is going to be quite impactful on his whole identity and that whole concept of who he was, and sort of this whole ability to commune with many different people. It wasn't just one type of person that he would commune with, because anybody with an open identity connects with the soul of a person. And because they connect with the soul, they don't look at what somebody looks like or how they're dressed or anything. They only see the person, say, their truest expression or the truest part of who they are inside their soul. And with an open identity, you could have this whole lovability concept where you may not feel like you were loved. But again, this is all based on the imprinting that he got as a child. And as a child, he was loved considerably. He was loved by his parents. He had a deep connection with his mother, who she died when he was fairly young, but he had a deep connection with his mother. In fact, he felt very loved by his mother. So that would have been an imprint that came early on in his life. And that would have been an influence that would have he didn't have a fixed identity, but it certainly would have imprinted him with this concept of being loved and feeling loved. He also had an open sacral, which we know makes him a manifester. Again, he could run on other people's energy and be really sort of have a lot of energy when he was around big groups of people. And then away from the groups of people, he would probably be very exhausted. He didn't live to be very old, and he died of a massive heart attack where he just sort of dropped after he had given a speech. So it means that he could have pushed himself beyond his capabilities. I'm sure that meditation helped a lot, but sometimes so much need and want for spiritual leaders that they sometimes, and especially with the will center being defined, I know I'm jumping ahead, but because it is defined, we should connect that the concept of going beyond your humanly capability because you can will yourself. And when you have an open sacral, that can be a whole problem with burnout. Although he always seemed to be okay. Once again, we could go back to the whole meditation concept of being able to keep himself fairly healthy. Because as far as I heard from, based on his biography, was that he basically had good health for the most part. He also had an open root, which means the whole concept of always needing to finish things, needing to get things done and move on to the next thing. So there could be a pressure to continue to move forward, to continue to do things. That was probably something he did a lot of because he had a lot of work to do, and he had financial feelings that he had to take care of the finances of all these. He had these yoga centers or something like that, and just trying to finance all those centers, there was always this constant need to keep moving, to keep getting things done. So the open route certainly would have helped with that part of it. And if there's anything that we can say about his chart, we can say that there's a lot of openness. There's only 3 centers out of 9 that are defined. So this was a person who had a tremendous amount of openness. And so that means this ability to have a less fixed way of being. Although he did have specific things that he taught, like he did teach yoga, he did teach meditation and certain things like that. But there was this ability to change based on who he was with, his audience. If we look at his throat, we know that he has a motorized and defined throat because he's a manifester. A motorized throat is somebody who can be heard easily. They can initiate conversations. So because of that, he never would have needed to wait to be acknowledged before he spoke. He could just say what he wanted to say, and he wouldn't need any kind of initiation into conversation. So that was his ability to be able to speak whenever he wanted to speak, to initiate conversations, and to be heard in the way he wanted to be heard. He also had the defined spleen, and I talked about he has a lot of gates on the spleen. We'll talk about those in a minute, but a defined spleen is somebody who has a good sense of time and a more fixed way of how his intuition expressed and how he learned about his health. And he also had a defined will. Now, a defined will would make people think that he was the type of person that could get the job done, somebody who knew what they were doing, because anybody with a defined will has this way of just the energy of the defined will has people believing that this person get the job done. A defined will can empower people. A defined will is about the resources that we bring in as well. So making money and those types of things would have probably been important to him, which they were, but it wasn't like a materialistic perspective. It was a tribal perspective, in that he needed to bring finances into his centers so that he could continue to run these centers. And that was part of what he had to do. So because he had a defined will, that meant that, making money might have been a little bit easier for him too, as in making money for his centers, not for himself, but I mean, he could have used it for himself, but as far as what I read, he used it for all his centers, and he lived a very sparse life. Because he had a defined will, there could have been potential for people to want to be competitive with him. There was potential for that. I do know that he did have a friend who was a very good friend of his, who they sort of went through pretty much everything together. And this friend was in training like him, and he helped him with a lot of these centers. But at one point, his friend sort of turned against him and wanted money from him, and became, I guess, in a way, sort of competitive with him. So this is the kind of energy, although he may not have been competitive at all, that he could have had directed at him just based on his will center. And also to remember is that the will center is work to rest. So it was important, and it is important for anybody with a defined will, to do a certain amount of work or whatever they want to do or need to do, and then to have rest times where they are recuperating from all the work they've done. And I think that he probably managed this in a way with his meditations. That would be sort of his way of reviving himself and recuperating and getting the rest he needed. So the meditation was a really important part of his life, and it became where he became more and more deeply involved in the meditation. He always had been involved, but his meditations went deeper and deeper, where he'd almost go into a trance-like state that he was, his pulse would go down and he would just be completely lost in the meditation. So let's go on to the gates and talk about the gates and also the channels as well as the planets. So if we start with his sun, we see that his conscious sun was in the gate 54, and his unconscious sun was in the gate 57. He had the right angle cross of penetration, and that's kind of like a penetrating intuition and almost like a shocking intuition, and how much intuition people with this energy have. And it is all about starting things. And I'm just talking about the incarnation cross just because it's in relation to his particular destiny, or how he lived his expression of life. So if we look at his personality sun, we see it's in the gate 54. The gate 54 is all about ambition and moving forward in life. It's a tribal energy, so it is about this energy of doing what you do for the tribe or for the people that matter to you. He did have a lot of tribal energy because he had a deep connection with his family, but this ambition was basically in his sun, which was what he shone out to the world. This ambition, if we look below it, was to what was the ambition connected to? Well, it was connected to the gate 53, which is all about new beginnings, starting things. And it makes a lot of sense because that's what he did. He went around and he started yoga center or meditation centers, or I don't know if they were called ashrams, but they might have been. I think they are called ashrams. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he went around in North America, which is a country that was completely unfamiliar to him. In fact, his intention, or what he wanted to do in his life, was to go and be a yogi in the Himalayas. And this was completely the opposite direction. Destiny, he knew, based on the gurus and his own intuition, told him that his destiny was not to go in the mountains, although that's what he really wanted to do. So it was about this new beginning and starting new things. So that was consciously, he was ambitiously starting new things, new projects, new meditation centers, and bringing new information to the world. Unconsciously, he was using his deep penetrating intuition, the gate 57. He could tell if they were telling the truth just in their voice. And that was one of his gifts. 57 is one of the most intuitive gates of all the gates in human design. The other thing about this energy is that it's a fear gate, because all the gates of the spleen are about fear. So there could have potentially been fear about what the future was going to bring, how it was going to look for him, and was it going to be okay? Were things going to work out? So that is a potential that he had a lot of fear about the future, although he managed to push through that fear and do those things that somebody who completely, it would have been a total culture shock, completely changing, coming from India, which had this real concept of yogis and what they brought and the spiritual connection and all that type of thing, to come to a country where that just was not done and was not really heard of, and to completely start a brand new revolution or a new way of seeing meditation and all those types of things would have been quite a scary thing. But yet, for some reason, he was able to continue on. And the reason, based on his chart, would have been what he was grounded in. Again, in the unconscious side, the design side, was this shocking things happening in his life. And what could be more shocking than moving across the ocean to this brand new country? So it all sort of plays out in how his life was really the mirror. His body graph was the mirror of how his life kind of unfolded. And he did have shocking experiences throughout his life. I mean, it wasn't just, that was hugely shocking to move to a brand new country that he'd never seen. And it was in the 20s, which it was a completely different place to what it is now. I mean, this kind of thing just wasn't seen and done. And here he was showing up. And he, like I said, he did have these shocking experiences as well, where when his mother passed away, she was preparing for the brother's wedding, Yogananda's brother's wedding, and she was in a different area, and he had this dream that she was going to pass away, and he told his father, we need to go immediately see my mother, because she's going to die and I may never see her again. And father, I don't think, believed him, or he thought he was just having a bad dream, and they did end up seeing her the next day, but she had already passed. So he had these shocking experiences where he knew things and had these predictions, which would be 100% the whole 57 concept of these psychic predictions of the future. And so you could see that actually happened in his life. If you look at his moon and what drove him, and we look at his moon in the personality side or the conscious side, the moon was in the gate 29. The gate 29 is all about devotion to something, a passion for something. He was driven by a passion. He was driven for a passion for all the things in the incarnation cross. He was driven for a passion for starting things. He was driven for a passion of being ambitious. He was driven by the passion of this penetrating intuition. He was driven by a passion for bringing shocking new things to the world. And so that was another thing. And when we talk about the gate 29, we are talking about being at the right place at the right time. We are talking about an energy that you're all about this concept of any of the gates that come from the sacral to the G center are considered what's called tantric gates. And tantric gates in the human design system, it's all about this concept of taking energy and transforming that energy into a higher form. So you take a lower form energy and you transform it to a higher energy, and that's literally what he was always doing. He was taking these concepts, meditating, and trying to transform the energy of other people into a higher form of that energy. The gate 29 is a deep devotion, and when you get that deep devotion or that deep passion or connection with something in your life, everything sort of falls into place and you kind of get into the flow of where you're meant to be. When we're talking about the moon, we know that it drove him. It was a driving force for his life, but we're also talking about an emotional connection. So there was emotional connection to this devotion. His devotion was to his meditation, to his spiritual connection, to, who he considered God, the universe, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, he had a specific name, as anybody does when they have a spiritual devotion, but his spiritual devotion was to what he called God. And because of that, He was willing to go across the ocean, leave his whole country to bring a brand new concept to new people. The other side, the unconscious side, was this 35, and this is the experience. Now, the experience is something that when we're talking about the gate 35, it's not just jumping into any experience. This is somebody who can be good at a lot of things, but they only choose to do what feels like it's worthwhile for them. So he obviously felt like what he was doing was worthwhile. So he picked what was right for him, and he was driven to bring this thing, whatever it was, which we know it was meditation, spiritual devotion, and these new centers and new ways of thinking and being, to North America. And he did that because that was obviously something that meant a lot to him. That was an experience that was important to him, that he had to experience because it was an important part of him, although it was in his unconscious part. And most of his journey began when he hadn't actually hit his 40th birthday. So this would have been an unconscious feeling on how he was driving himself into this experience without really knowing that he was doing it, but just this draw to go to a new place and a new world. So if we go to his south nodes to begin with, because that would have been first stage of life, and we know that because he is a 1-3 profile, it would have been connected to his Uranus opposition, that he would have moved on to the north node. The south node was in the gate 28. The gate 28 is the gate of struggle, or it can be the gate of what's possible, but the deepest meaning of the gate 28 is the meaning of life. So his first 40 years would have been potentially looking at, what does life mean? What's the point of us being here? And what's the reason why we're here? Why is it all happening? There's also this can-do perspective in the gate 28. When somebody says you can't do something, you say, no, I can do it. And so it's always going to push back at somebody, where if they're telling you that it can't be done, you're going to say it can be done. And when we're also talking about the gate 28, we're also talking about an energy of doing the hardest thing that you can do, just because you want to do the hardest thing. You want to play the hardest instrument. You want to start the hardest craft. You want to start the hardest sport. Whatever's difficult to do, the gate 28 gravitates towards it. And it would make a lot of sense to come across the ocean to do this brand new thing, to start breaking ground where no ground had ever been broken before. The gate 44, the other south node in the design side, was this energy of patterns, and looking at the patterns and seeing the patterns, and also using this ability to sniff out what was right for him. So that was another type of intuition that he had. He could smell what was right in his life or for him. But also there, with the gate 44, you have this ability to sell something. You make something beautiful so that you could sell it. So he was selling concepts. And I mean, I use the word sell in a very loose term. I mean, he was talking about concepts that he was very devoted to, because we have the gate 29, and he was allowing people to join him in with this concept of, this is what I believe in. And he was selling, loose term, selling the concepts so he could spread the word. If we look at the north node in the personality side, we see that it's in the gate 27, which is a deep caring. So this is a person that even more so after he turned 40, it's not like it's not there at all, but it just becomes a bigger theme in the life after the age of 40, or the Uranus opposition. It's deep caring. It's like he didn't just do things because they were to be done. He did things because it mattered to him, because he cared. And there is a tremendous amount of wanting to take care of people, to preserve people, to just give them a lot of caring. He also had the gate 24 in the north node in the design side, and that's unconscious. This is a rationalizing things, making a rationalization for what he did and what he said, and so that could have been related to what he was teaching to people. And also this idea that you return to where you began, so that you can figure out all the things that you did right, and how what things you could get done better. And there's a tremendous amount of investigation with this energy. Like, it's almost like you go to the scene of the crime again, and you check out all the details of how you can improve the experience the next time. And it is connected to the gate 21 if there was a full channel, and that's connected to kind of wanting to know the unknowable. Could have been this rationalizing for all the things he did. And that's not a bad thing because it seemed like it worked out well in his life. When we go to his Mercury, he communicated his ideas because the gate 11 is all about ideas, but there is this level of peace as well. And when you have the gate 11, you have a tremendous amount of ideas. It's like overflowing with ideas. So he would have communicated a lot of his ideas. He also has the gate 57 in Mercury in his design side. Now, we already see that the gate 57 was a theme in his life because we see that it's featured in his unconscious sun as well as his unconscious Mercury. So we know that for him, intuition was a huge component of who he was. So he would have been able to communicate his intuitive thoughts about what was going on and the hits he was getting on the future. He would have been able to communicate that to people. We get to his Venus. What was the feminine energy that he was connected to, or the things that he liked from that perspective? It was this ability for the greater good. So we have the gate 26 is all about the greater good. I give you something and I win from giving it to you, and you win because you get it. So it's a win-win kind of concept. So if we're looking at this energy, what he felt he was giving, this feminine or this yin perspective of this softness of the intention or the meditations that he was giving, was in his perspective a win-win, and it was given in the concept of, and it's given in integrity. And if we look at his Venus and his design side, gate 59, and that's all about breaking barriers, and which he did. I mean, he broke barriers. And if we take it one step farther and we talk about this feminine energy, he broke barriers because a lot of women were drawn to this energy, and women decided that they were actually going to step out and support something and sort of try something different. I mean, we're talking about the 20s and 30s when women were at home, they didn't have jobs, they didn't do anything but take care of the kids, and suddenly they had this ability to go out and learn something new, to learn how to meditate, to learn how to have a specific spiritual practice that nobody had ever seen before. So it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways, and a lot of women gravitated to this energy. So you could say that he broke barriers with the feminine energy, and they continued and joined his movement. And if we look at his Mars, this is where he would have become more mature as he grew up, as he became older. And in Mars, we have the gate 17. So the gate 17 is all about opinions, all about hypothesis. This is a hypothesis that hasn't been proven. This is the idea before the experiment has been done. So maybe he had concepts and ideas about certain things that would have transformed or evolved as he grew older, which probably, I would say for sure, was the case with him. And also in the other Mars, we have the gate 13, and we did talk about the gate 13 being the only energy that he had on his chi center. The gate 13 is a transformative energy. It is about listening to the stories of people, and by listening to the stories of people, you are in some way transforming them and sort of allowing them to evolve to that thing that they were meant to be. And that's, I think, a lot of what he did. And that was his only gate on his identity center. So that would have meant that his identity was connected deeply with this idea of transformation of people, which all goes back to this meditation concept again. So if we go down to his Saturn, because it's always nice to know what your Saturn is before you can get your Jupiter rewards. If we look at his Saturn, we see that he had this depth. So the gate 48 is all about depth, and there is this level of inadequacy. So was there potential for him to feel inadequate in what he was doing, and to have to push through that ability to say, oh, well, I don't know enough to be able to allow people to hear the information that I have. I don't know enough to be able to be a yogi or a guru or whatever I need to be. And when he felt confident in who he was and that he had had enough learning, was he able to take that out and show it to the world, which he did. So he did push through his Saturn, and he did it quite well based on his life. The other Saturn is this critical energy and this need for perfection. And so that could be another stumbling block where he wanted things to be perfect, and seeing that the world isn't perfect, there could have been some level of having to learn that the perfection that he seeks is not attainable, but in some way he found a perfection that he could hold on to, and that was his perfection in his devotion to God, the universe, and that connection that he had. What his reward was in Jupiter was again, half of the gate of the shaman, which is the gate 51. Again, 3 times in the chart, big theme. Gate 51 is all about these transformative experiences where he is changed, and the way he looks at the world is changed because of shocking events, or he himself could have transformed many people with the way he sort of initiated them, a manifester, but also initiated them with the gate 51 into this new concept of seeing something and seeing the world in a different way. So that would have been his reward, to have this deep impact and initiate people into seeing things in a different way. The gate 51 would be connected to the gate 25 if there was a complete channel. The gate 25 is the love of spirit, which meant that a lot of people would have been drawn to his energy, because it's all about electromagnetics, and the matching gate coming in to connect with the gate 51, the love of spirit, innocence, and deeply spiritual energy of that particular gate. When we go down to his Uranus, we see that he has a gate 28 in the unconscious and the gate 44. So 2 repeated gates. We already talked about the gate 44, but you would look at Uranus, you would say the gate 44 in Uranus is like an unusual way of selling ideas, or unusual ideas that he was selling, unusual ways of seeing repeated patterns in his life. And if we look at it on the other side, we see it in the design side, or in the unconscious, unusual struggles. So the kind of struggles that he had, or the kind of things that he felt were his struggles in his life, may have been completely different than the struggles that the average person would have, because it would be where he was more unusual. If we look at his Neptune, the Neptune is exactly the same, because we're getting into the energies of these planets that move very little, and it's all in the 16. And he was born under a Neptune Pluto conjunction, which is a really rare, very rare thing that would happen, and it won't happen for hundreds of years again. So the fact that he was born under this conjunction was kind of mystical in itself. And what that meant was that his Neptune and his Pluto were in the gate 16. The gate 16 is all about enthusiasm. So you have 4 times that the gate 16 is featured. And this is an enthusiasm to deliver the depth, what he knows, this enthusiasm to spread the word. For him, it was all about meditation, spirituality, and in these centers that he was doing. And it was with an enthusiasm. Now, this enthusiasm, it's your finding that thing that gives you sort of that vibe to that life is a wonderful place, because you found that one thing. It's something that makes your heart sing. So through his Neptune, his spirituality, he found that his spirituality made him sing. But this enthusiasm was transformative. This enthusiasm was something that pushed him to places that he probably never would have gone before, because Pluto would have shaken his foundation, and his enthusiasm would have been bolstered and transformed again and again, because Pluto is all about transforming and changing. But again, this would not have been an easy transformation, because anything in Pluto, this enthusiasm, what made his heart sing, he would have had some trials and tribulations to get to that level of enthusiasm, to continue on with the devotion of what he wanted to bring into the world. If we look at the channels he only has 2 full channels. The 2 full channels he came into the world with were the 1648 and also the 2644. The 1648 is a line of talent. It means that people with this energy have a level of mastery in what they bring to the world. And I would say that his meditation, what he taught, his teachings, was a level of mastery that made him who he was, made him a spiritual leader, and somebody who is still, a lot of people have a devotion to him even to this day. the 4426 channel, it's all about bringing in the resources needed. So he had the talent for all the things he could do, like his meditation, or he had a talent for many things. And he also had the ability to bring the resources into to support all the things he needed them to be supported. And it's a tribal energy, so he was doing it for the tribe to bring the amount of money that he needed to get these centers run. And it wasn't always easy, but it always sort of worked out. There also is this idea that you're with the 2644, this ability to sell things or to sell an idea, to sell a concept is great, because it's actually defining the will center, and it is also the line of, there's a lot of sales energy in this particular line. So this is a good thing, because of his ability to have this energy that talked about being able to sell things or sell ideas. It was that people were able to adopt what he wanted to give them, to be able to go across the country, to be able to go to places and have these big speeches and to talk to bunches of people and stadiums full of people to teach the concepts that he was trying to teach, was definitely bolstered by this 2644 energy. Because when you have that energy, it already makes you somebody who people want to listen to, and comes with a tremendous amount of integrity. Or the other aspect is selling things that benefit you but don't benefit others, and I don't think that was the case for him. I mean, I think there was a tremendous amount of integrity that came through with this energy as well. So those were the two channels that were defined in his whole chart, and definitely be seen in the trajectory of his life. And I'm not going to go through all the lines of the gates, because I already talked quite a bit and I'm starting to lose my voice, and I think it's getting to be that time when I'm going to close up the video. But if we just look at the particular gates, so if we look at the 53 in his conscious earth, we see that 53 is in the gate 1. So we think about investigating, starting new things. If we look at the gate 54, we can see the 54 in the line 1, investigating ambition. How does my ambition look, and how can I take it out into the world, and sort of finding out the information and investigating what his ambition looked like and how it sort of factored in his life. The gate 57 is in the line 3, so experimenting with his intuition, experimenting with what he could see in the future, experimenting with his penetrating intuition. The gate 51 in the line 3 is experimenting with initiating people or shocking people into the concepts that he wanted to bring to the table, and it's all about experimenting with it. If we look at the gate 16, we see that the gate 16 is in the line 3, 4, 5, and 6. So in that case, we would have the enthusiasm where he was experimenting with his enthusiasm, experimenting with what made his heart sing. Then when he found that the information that he learned from what made his heart sing, then he built a foundation with his enthusiasm. He built a foundation with what exactly made everything light up in his life. Then he went on to universalize that energy, or to share that energy share the energy of his enthusiasm with the world. And then after he was 50, he brought the enthusiasm into a role model concept, where by being himself, he was just showing the world what enthusiasm looked like, and also showing the world what it feels like to chase that thing that makes your heart sing, and to completely adopt it in your life. So that's how the lines would work. And if we look at where he had talent for critical thought, because he had the 18 in the line 2. He had talent for initiating people or shocking people into getting closer to God. He had talent for finding out what opinions were important and what were not as important, as well as understanding what hypotheses were worthwhile and which ones weren't. He also had talent with his devotion and what drove him, and also the concept of transforming energy from a lower form to a higher form. So those were all the talents that he had coming into the world. So you could use the lines to just give one more dimension to the whole body graph. And if you use all the concepts, now of course, I've read a few charts, so I'm quite familiar with reading human design charts. So it's easy for me to get into the details. But for if you wanted to just use a keyword and connect it with the planetary energy, or just use a keyword for the gates to start out with, to get the energy of what that gate means, how it looks, and check it out in your whole own life and see how you express that gate. And if you know somebody else who has the same gate as you, just watching them and how they express the gate, because once you get a feel for the energy of your own gates, it's easier to see it in other people. So when you get a real good concept of your body graph, then it's easier to go out and start looking at other people's body graphs and connecting with that. But if there's anything to say about the whole thing about learning how to read your own chart, it's about taking your time, giving yourself a break, understanding that this information can take some time to get into your system, to integrate, and being patient that eventually it will all come together. And if it means that you read different people's charts, I find that reading celebrity charts it's usually pretty good, because we have so much information about celebrities, and you can connect the information from the body graph a lot of times with some of the expression or the energy that you see in the world. So a lot of people with a 5-1 profile are actors. So if you look at the amount of actors who have a 5-1 profile, you'll see that there's a fair few of them. So just those little tiny things that you can use, and practice it as much as you can, and the more you do, the better you'll get. So I hope that this series and this course has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I will either answer them in the comment section, or I'll say, I'll make a comment that I will answer them in an upcoming video. And the more I can help, the better, because the reason why I did this course and the reason why I have it free on YouTube is because I want more and more people to know about their human design, because I know it's so valuable, and it can save a lot of grief for not only you, but in your relationships, other people's relationships. If you help them with their body graphs, you help them to learn human design, and the benefit is so immense that I don't think there's any reason why we need to keep this secret anymore. So let's open the jar of secrets and sprinkle them around the world, and let human design spread, and let people benefit from the energy of knowing more about who they are. Because as I always say, the more we know about ourselves, the easier life gets. So thank you so much for being here, and I will be back another time with more information on human design, more human design videos, and thank you again